All right, well, thank you very much, and thank you to the editorial board for giving me the opportunity to come. My name is John Milhiser. I'm the Sangamon County State's Attorney. I'm honored to be in that position, and I feel very fortunate because I went to law school to be a prosecutor, and I've been able to build a career in that area. I'm not originally from Springfield or Sangamon County. I went to law school at the University of Illinois, but I grew up, my father was in the Air Force, so we grew up moving all around the country. Fortunately, I went to law school at the U of I, where I met my wife, who's also a lawyer. She brought me back to Springfield in 1997, and I started my career in the state's attorney's office. And I'm raising my two daughters here, and this community is very important to me. This is the longest, by far, I've lived in the same place, and it is, the community is very important. And that's why I think the state's attorney's office is in my mind, so important to me, because I can positively affect the community every day in the state's attorney's office. I also can in my private life. My wife and I are actively involved in the community on boards. For 6 years, I was on the Public Schools Foundation Board, helping raise money for the Springfield Public Schools. I'm on the Helping Hands Board, the Mental Health Centers of Central Illinois, Child Advocacy Center, Child Death Review Team. In my professional life, I'm elected to the Board of Governors of the Appellate Prosecutor's Office, Treasurer of the State's Attorneys Association. So actively involved, honored to be State's Attorney, and looking forward to continuing as Sangamon County State's Attorney.
Well, my name is Stradt, and just a little brief history about myself. When I was born, a month before I was born, my mother just turned 20, and I'm number 3 out of 6. By the time I was 5, my parents had divorced and remarried. We had very little financial means. My mother was an Avon lady, and my father was a truck driver. College was something that we never spoke of in our family because we just didn't have the money. And there were certain events that happened in my life that shaped me early on. One was the Iranian hostage crisis, the Beirut bombing, and President Reagan, who at the time said to people that if you want to make something of yourself, you're gonna have to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And that's what I did. I enlisted in the Marine Corps, and I spent 5 years in the Marines. When I was in the Marine Corps, I developed a lot of confidence in different areas, and one of them was to go to school. And so I balanced my Marine Corps life with night school, and I was able to complete my undergraduate degree in business administration. Now, however, I do have to say that I was stationed in Iwakuni, Japan, and when I was discharged, I moved to Tokyo, and I had to commute an hour and a half one way by train to the Yokota Air Base to complete my education. But once I did, I came back to Illinois, and I went to the University of Illinois and got a master's degree in policy economics. And then, of course, I went to law school, and I've been an attorney for about 15 years.
Interesting on that, Ron. So if Ronald Reagan was a mentor in that regard, what made you a Democrat?
Well, I didn't say that he was a mentor. It was just the message that he was saying at the time. And I graduated high school in 1981 up in Rock Island County, and the economy was about what it is now. Not very good. A lot of the jobs were drying up, and that's when Reagan was saying, if you want to make something of yourself, you're going to have to do it. You can't depend on the government to provide it for you. So, I mean, I took that message to heart. If I wanted to do something with my life, well, then I saw the Marine Corps as a way to do it.
Gotcha. And John, you mentioned these boards you're on. Are any of those because you're state's attorney? Is there like an ex officio?
The only one, because I'm state's attorney, is the Child Advocacy Center board, and the state's attorney has historically been the chair of that board. But the other ones I was on long before I was state's attorney, the majority of them.
Okay. I guess one question is staffing level of the state's attorney's office and pay. Where is it, and does it need to change to handle the caseload that we have?
You know, I could always use more money, but having said that, the county board is fiscally responsible, and I operate within their budget constraints. I've been very fortunate to, last summer, so the summer of 2011, I went to the county board and I said, I need more money for my starting prosecutors. The starting pay was $30,000. I got that up to $40,000. That allowed me to hire very qualified, in my mind, very qualified, and be more competitive in hiring new attorneys. And that's one of the joys of being a state's attorney. One of the more enjoyable parts is hiring new attorneys and training them. which is important. I was on the faculty of the National District Attorneys Association New Prosecutor Boot Camp in Columbia, South Carolina, where I taught a class on ethics. And so it's very important to me training new prosecutors for them to understand the responsibilities that come with the position. That just out of law school, they are making decisions that affect people's lives every day. Even if they're just misdemeanor cases or traffic cases, whether charges are filed or how you proceed or how you deal with the police, whether you get a search warrant, all affects somebody's life. And so it's very important to tell those new prosecutors that. So while we could use more money, I've been very fortunate, and when I interview law students, we have a very good internship program. So a lot of times I have people in high school, college, and law school that work in the office to get a taste of what a prosecutor's office is like. And then oftentimes I will hire those that have been in the office that I get a chance to see how they can work. They get a chance to see if that's really what they want to do. And we have very good prosecutors who do their best every day.
How many lawyers
yes.
do you have?
Currently 28 lawyers.
28. And is that the same as when you began?
There's one less. I have one less attorney than when I started. But again, the county pays low, but I get people that want to be prosecutors, that want to do a good job, and oftentimes they move on. And I understand that. They're going to come and they're going to work for a couple years, go to a private firm where they can make more money. I understand that. I don't begrudge them, and then I go and look for another person in law school that wants to be a prosecutor.
And the annual budget of the office is about what?
It's roughly $3.2 million or $3.3 million.
Okay, staffing?
Well, I was an assistant attorney general under Jim Ryan, and he had a very good model for rewarding assistant state's attorneys by giving them big bumps in pay raises, and I think that pay is an issue, but funding is also an issue too. A couple of things that I want to do if elected state's attorney is I want to have online or mail-in court supervision to waste the time of people who are coming into court for a minor traffic offense. And if you've ever seen the courthouse on traffic day, there's a long line of people, and all those people, I mean, I don't know if they're employed or unemployed or have nothing else better to do but to be in court, but I think that if we could have a system of mail-in online court supervision, that would free up judges' time, court reporters' time, clerks' time.
So this is like if you plead guilty to a ticket and get court supervision?
Right. There's Supreme Court rules on what offenses are eligible for court supervision, and there's at least one county now, I think it's DuPage County, that does have an online.
I heard Tony Levy talking on the radio about this yesterday, the circuit clerk, and he was saying that there's not approval for this yet from the Supreme Court.
Well, it's something that we need. It's something that we need to work on. But as far as funding of the office, one of the things I've been telling people that I want to do is I want to go after that $2.7 million from the Populex contract. My view is, and I'm trying to educate people that the state's attorney is more than just a person who's going to prosecute cases. They're the chief legal advisor to the county board and to department heads. And I think that when we have a state's attorney who's in the courtroom daily, they're ignoring these other responsibilities. And this Populex contract where we pay $2.7 million, that's the contract where Sangamon County entered into the contract for these voting machines, and the State Board of Elections would not certify them because they didn't meet the federal voting requirements. Well, when you enter into a contract with somebody for goods or services and they don't provide, you get your money back. We have yet to get our money back. The other thing that
this happened earlier, I mean, this started under John Schmidt, correct?
It was, the contract was entered to, I believe, in 2006, possibly, so we're still within the time frame to get it. The other thing that I want to do is I want to make banks and mortgage companies pay the recording fee. And Josh Langfelder, who's our county recorder, has said there's up to $600,000 of fees that are not being paid to the recorder's office as a result of these mortgage and banks. What they're doing is they're operating under a shell, and they're trading or buying and selling these mortgages amongst themselves under the shell to avoid paying the recorder's fee. That's another $600,000. So those are two things that I want to do.
So are you talking about taking everybody to court? Because, I mean, there's a big expense in that too, isn't there?
Well, no, ideally what you do is before you initiate any litigation is you send a demand letter to the individual that you're planning on suing and just laying it out. We're planning on suing you, but let's make a deal. I hate to say it that way, but I mean, if you have two reasonable people that are opposite of each other and they can discuss what the issue is to avoid litigation, to come to some sort of solution to get some of our money back. But,
And did I interpret what you said as that John spends too much time in court?
well, John says that we need to elect a professional prosecutor who's going to be in court daily. And, my view is we have, as he said, 28 assistant state's attorneys. I think we're paying, I'm surprised to hear that the overall budget is $3.2 million, because I think we're paying close to $3 million in salaries alone. But there has to be a balance between the state's attorney who's going to be in court prosecuting cases and being available to provide the legal advice to the county board and the department heads.
John, a few things were just said about what's going on.
I'll take them in order. The
Right.
Populex machines were, I think it was back in 2005, and it was a contract between the county clerk, Joe Alio, and a company to supply these voting machines. They weren't recertified, so it was $2.7 million. Of that, 2.5 was a federal grant that was given, so it wasn't county money. A federal grant for the purpose of specifically buying those machines. When they weren't recertified, it was looked at by the county clerk, by the state's attorney's office, and by the county to decide whether or not it made sense to sue a company that had no assets, and it did not at that time, and nothing's changed. So that's Populex. With regard to MERS, I'm in conversations routinely, and my office is with
what?
MERS, which is the mortgage fee that that was referred to. There's already a lawsuit in St. Clair County. We're following that. We're also talking with other counties about possibly a class action lawsuit and working with Josh on that. So that's in the works, and we're talking with Josh about the best avenue and the best way to proceed in that regard. And the last one was experience. Okay, in court. Well, it is vital that the state's attorney be an experienced prosecutor for several reasons. One is it's important that when a family comes in who's lost a loved one, you can look them in the eyes and say, I'm going to go to court, I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure the person responsible is held accountable, and we're going to get them. And I'm going to go into court and do that for you, or one of my prosecutors is going to do that. That's important, but also, there's not a day that goes by where I don't have young attorneys coming into my office talking about cases, whether it be what's an appropriate offer on this case, what is, maybe they have a trial coming up, they have an evidentiary issue, and unless you've been in court and unless you've tried those cases, unless you've dealt with law enforcement, and I've handled thousands of cases, you don't know those answers. So that's very, very important that the state's attorney be a professional prosecutor, and that's what I've built my career doing, and that's what I want to continue doing.
Ron, you said you were an assistant. Have you been in court much, or does it matter?
Oh, yeah. I was an assistant state's attorney in Rock Island County, and I was an assistant attorney general under Jim Ryan.
Okay, did that include court work too?
Oh, yeah, it was all court work.
I know there are lots of day-to-day issues, and anybody can feel free to jump in, but there's a couple of, I don't know if we call them political or kind of environmental things. Ron, I think I'll start with you. You went before the appellate court, because I heard the argument. Sorry I couldn't make it the day you were there, but to have them on tape. And there's a difficult situation between, with your divorce and custody battle, and I'm glad to see your daughter for lunch today. But you basically said to me, and I put in the paper, that you think most of the judges in Sangamon County were out to get you because you're a Democrat, because they're Republicans. So you've basically attacked the integrity of many of the judges that you would work with as state's attorney. How do you reconcile running for state's attorney and wanting to be the state's attorney when you're going to have to work with judges that you have basically said are not fair?
Well, there's a lot of difficulties in life, and as I said earlier, I wasn't one of those that was born with a silver spoon in my mouth. So I've had to overcome a lot of challenges and a lot of difficult situations. Working with the judges is just one of those aspects, and I would like to think that they're going to keep it professional if I'm working with them on a level as the state's attorney.
Okay. And Mr. Milhiser, you are one of several Republican state's attorneys who didn't get elected to the job. You got appointed to the job after the last guy got bumped up to judge, and actually John got bumped up just in time to get the best pension he could before the new system kicked in. You also were the chair of the Sangamon County Republican Luncheon, or dinner. You were there helping to introduce Ted Nugent, who said horrible things about, our president and other Democrats. So are you too much of a partisan, having come through that system, to fairly deal with Republicans who get in trouble in this county?
Yeah, not at all. And I've told you before, and I'll say it again, politics plays no part in anything that is done in the state's attorney's office. Politics plays no part in the evaluation of cases, in charging decisions, and outcomes of cases. It can't. For the system to work, it can't play any part. The Illinois Constitution says that the state's attorney shall run for election. It wasn't always the case. Initially, back in the 1800s, the governor appointed the state's attorney, and they represented several counties.
Some governors wouldn't be so good at that.
Yeah. So it wasn't until the Illinois Constitution of 1870 that said state's attorneys shall run for election every 4 years. So we're on the presidential cycle. So, in fact, somebody asked me a couple months ago, when did you decide you wanted to be a politician? My answer was, I never decided I want to be a politician. I want to be a prosecutor. And to continue to be Sangamon County State's Attorney, I need to win election so I can continue for another 4 years. With regard to being appointed by the county board, I was honored. I was first assistant at the time. I was honored to be selected by the county board and approved unanimously for that position. And I felt that I had built my career. I had tried cases. I had dealt with other elected officials in the county. So I put myself in a position where I was experienced enough and I had the training necessary to assume the position of state's attorney. And I'm honored to be in that spot.
Did you write a letter for Bill Cellini, by the way?
I did not.
Okay. Were you asked? Were you asked to?
I was not.
Okay.
Can I respond? I've put out this challenge, and I have yet to receive an answer, and I hope that before the end of the election, maybe somebody can help me out with this. When was the last time there were two candidates for Sangamon County State's Attorney where one was not already appointed by the county board? And our Constitution does say that this is a government where we are going to elect our leaders. And I think that when the political powers circumvent that by appointing someone into office and they give them a leg up by appointing them into the office at a point where they're going to be able to establish some sort of record, get the name recognition, and so on. And to me, that creates a problem not only on a constitutional level, but on a level that it creates the perception that the individual who's being appointed into the office, and in this case the state's attorney, they become beholden to those political powers that put them in that position. Now, one case in point is 4 years ago, you might recall that when I said that the state's attorney's role is to advise county department heads, my advice to one of the county department heads would be to resign because I thought that his personal problems had tarnished the office. And I got backlash.
Who did you say should resign?
That was Joe Alio.
Oh, okay.
So, John Schmidt said that's not my job, and it was just a big fiasco. Now, here we are 4 years later, and the political powers to be, Andy Van Meter and Sheriff Neil Williamson and I suppose others. I don't know who's all involved, but the political rhetoric coming from them was, if Susan Boone doesn't resign, we're going to abolish the office. Now, notwithstanding whether or not Susan Boone was a good coroner or a bad coroner, effective, ineffective, or whatever the case may be, I just think that it's wrong to say to an elected official, if you don't do what we tell you, we're going to abolish your office. And so the press conference with Van Meter and Williamson and John Milhiser was essentially that this is what we're going to do. We're going to abolish the office. I think that's wrong. I think that's bad advice to give. I think the state's attorney, when called by Van Meter and others to say, we want you to research this to abolish the office because she's not going to resign like we tell her, I think my advice would have been, look, if you want to abolish the office to consolidate the functions to save money, that's great. But if you want to abolish the office for the sole purpose of this person refusing to do what you tell them, that's wrong. And I think that this system of continually appointing somebody makes that somebody, and in this case the state's attorney, beholden to the political powers. And I think that just creates a problem with impartiality, and we need to change that. And if I'm elected, I can tell you that I am not going to put myself in a position where the county board is going to appoint my replacement without a special election.
Well, let's talk about Susan Boone, because I don't remember that particular press conference. I wasn't at it, but you were there.
I was there, and I will tell you unequivocally, my concern And I had been in office for several months. My concern was with the pathologist that was employed by our coroner. It was not with the coroner. The pathologist was ineffective and was affecting my ability to successfully investigate and prosecute cases. So that was my concern. Now, at that time, back in 2003, Governor Blagojevich got rid of what's called the necropsy board. It was a board that regulated the pathologists that were used in each county. So that was not there. And because that was not there, I and Sheriff Williamson, actually I sent a letter and then followed up with Neil Williamson, and we went and met with the director of public health of the state and said, you need to step in because the pathologist that is employed by our coroner needs to be changed. But it was the sole discretion of the coroner, and they did not get involved. So it was at that point that it was seriously affecting my ability to investigate cases and prosecute cases that a change needed to be made, not because necessarily the coroner, but because of the pathologist that she was employing.
Did you think we should no longer have a coroner and switch systems? Was that part of the message of that day?
Well, it was part of the message, and there was a Maximus study done, and if a system could be set up that was cost effective for a medical examiner, I would favor a medical examiner, but it's not. I still would, but it's not cost effective. And we thought that we could partner with the School of Medicine, which to me made sense, to get a board-certified forensic pathologist. That didn't work, so it was not cost effective, and it was too expensive to bring in a medical examiner.
Okay, and are you for Cinda now?
What?
Are you for Cinda?
I would say the current coroner, Cinda Edwards, is doing an excellent job. We have a good relationship with her office. The pathologist that she uses for cases that I'm involved in is Dr. Scott Denton, who I'd used before that, who I recommended, and who I wanted the old coroner to use, and she refused and wanted to use a pathologist that, in my mind, frankly, was not good and really affected the investigations by the police. Because early on, oftentimes you'll have the report of the pathologist. That will affect the direction of an investigation. And then later on, that is the evidence I have when I'm going to prosecute a case. So that was my focus and my concern, was to get a pathologist that was qualified and that wouldn't negatively affect my cases.
And Ron, as long as I asked him, are you for Jerry Curry, and do you think we should keep the coroner's office intact, or do you have an opinion on it?
Well, my opinion is probably similar to John's. I mean, if we can do it in a more cost-effective way, and if we don't need the coroner's office and we can save money in doing so, I think that's worth looking at, and I think that's worth having a conversation about. But I'm not saying that I'm for or against any other political.
And by the way, you said that there's a perception because the Republicans, got John, the county board moved, right. John Schmidt moved on, that there's a perception that, something unfair is happening. Do you have any evidence that there's anything unfair happening in the state's attorney's office?
Well, you mean with regard to being beholden to the political parties that appointed you? I mean, well, yeah. I mean, there are certain cases that have come up that have intrigued me a lot. When John was appointed, he made a speech, and he said that his number one goal is to guarantee and make sure that all criminals who commit a crime are locked away and to make our streets safe for our community. Another thing that he has said is that in the Illinois Times article, he said that everyone is held to the same standard, and if you commit a crime, then you're going to be prosecuted. Mm-hmm. And I can say that here's an individual who is the treasurer for Milhiser's political campaign, who received a speeding ticket, dismissed.
Wait, and can I stop right there?
Yes.
I mean, if I could have the date of that.
Yeah, it's 2008. It's April 15th, 2008.
Okay. And I was in the state's attorney's office. It was a former law partner of mine. He was not my treasurer. I was not the state's attorney at the time. So, I mean, and...
Yeah, could we have a more current, relevant case?
Yeah, sure. There's an individual who works for the county. The booking sheet shows that she was arrested with a baggie and straw with suspected cocaine residue. There's been no charges filed with that.
And again, I mean, if we're going to talk about specific cases, I'm more than happy to talk about specific cases. If you'll let me review them, there are thousands of cases that go through the office. I don't make charging decisions on each and every one. So what was the date of the county employee with the cannabis?
No, it was cocaine.
Of cocaine.
That was November 2010.
Okay.
Right after you were appointed
All right.
state's attorney.
And then if we look at, since I've been state's attorney, there have been several county employees who have been charged with crimes. Indicted was a sheriff's deputy. That case is still pending. Charged was a corrections officer who already pled guilty. Also, there have been several police officers that have been indicted and are pending. Their cases are currently pending. So I stand by my statement that if you commit a crime in Sangamon County, nobody is above the law. And every case is looked at individually, and politics plays absolutely no part in the charging decisions or the prosecutions in my office.
One of the things that we continually, it's like the playbook from one appointed state's attorney to another gets passed on. It's like, you know, you're a high school graduate and you're bequeathing certain things to your underlings there. And it's the political rhetoric of if you commit a violent felony in Sangamon County, you're going to be held accountable. And to me, that's just empty political rhetoric, because if the last crime stats I looked at, there are over 25 violent felonies being committed every day. And one of the people will always say, well, what are you going to do differently? Well, what I want to do differently is I think what we should do is bring together the stakeholders. Bring together the state's attorney, law enforcement, not just the county, but all the law enforcement within the county and the community leaders. Bring together this collaborative effort to deal with crime. And one of the things that has occurred recently is there was a Leland Grove attorney who evidently there was a woman who was extorting money from this guy. I think it was over $30,000. And she was arrested with pictures of this attorney having sex with a 14-year-old. The police chief of this community called up the state's attorney to get a search warrant. To date, there's been nothing going on. There's one last thing I want to talk about as far as the standard, as far as everybody being treated the same way. Here is the Conservation Police Field Report of John Milhiser hunting after dark with a loaded weapon. Receives a ticket for that, and it's dismissed.
That was in '04?
That was 2003, right after John had first left the state's attorney's office. But it just goes to show, I mean, in order to, I think in order to do something about crime in our neighborhoods, we have to be able to show the public that there isn't going to be a double standard, that it doesn't matter who you know. That, I mean, just take the case recently of the judge where Judge Perrin's daughter gets a ticket for going the wrong way on a one-way street. Now, here's a judge who makes $170,000 a year, talking about personal responsibility and accountability, trying to get his daughter out of a ticket. Now, he could do one of two things. He could say, you go to court like everybody else, or here's the money, you know, I'll pay it for you when I go to work today. But that's not the case. And I think that when people see that people are arrested and they go in the front door and they're let out the back door, that has no deterrent effect on crime.
But was that the state's attorney's problem? I mean, the judge resigned over that.
No, but this is part and parcel of the whole culture that happens in the county building.
And if I could just,
Yes, it's your turn now.
I mean, respond to these outrageous allegations by my opponent. You know, we're talking about, with regard to my ticket back in 2004, I was not in the state's attorney's office. I represented myself as I did other clients, and that case was dismissed. And on the facts, it would be dismissed 100% of the time. And so I represented myself in that case. And I think the same year, my opponent had a ticket dismissed. So, you know, there are upwards of 50,000 tickets that are written in this county, and each one is judged on individual facts, and many are dismissed. The fact is, my opponent is inexperienced and does not prosecute cases, hasn't been in the courtroom in a dozen years trying a case. He's been in the courtroom on his own divorce case. His wages were garnished because he had arrearage, because he didn't pay his child support. So this is a person who is resorting to attacks, because he's not qualified to be state's attorney. And I've tried to run a clean campaign and highlight my experience, highlight what the office has done, highlight the importance of the state's attorney's office to this community, and the importance of this community to me, and that's what I'll continue to do.
What about the not working together with other law enforcement and highlighting this? What are you doing in that?
And that's a good question. I work daily with law enforcement. There are upwards of 30 different law enforcement agencies in Sangamon County, and there's a U.S. Attorney's Office. And we have a good working relationship, I do, with all the law enforcement agencies and the U.S. Attorney's Office in prosecuting cases. We had a press conference a couple weeks ago. U.S. Attorney Jim Lewis and myself had the press conference involving the indictment of 13 or 14 individuals. One was the brother, and actually the ringleader was the brother of an individual that was prosecuted by me personally last month. Jesus Ramirez, who was involved in a high-speed chase with a kilogram of cocaine, tried to kill 2 of our police officers. I prosecuted that case and he was convicted. But the partnership, and I guess we talk about partnerships, and it's essential to making this community safer. And I've spoken before I've spoken to breakfast at the Faith Coalition and said, law enforcement and the State Attorney's Office can't do it by ourselves. We need the help of the public. We need the help of the community. I need the help of law enforcement to investigate cases, to work collaboratively to make this community safer. And I go speak to the different neighborhood associations. Enos Park has a very active neighborhood association, and they've done a wonderful job in that area fixing up the houses and helping to alleviate some of the crime in that area. So I think it's important that the community work together, that law enforcement work together, and that's what I've been doing and I'll continue to do.
The problem is, when I've met a lot of people in between the last campaign and this campaign, and I would say by the time this campaign is over, I will have personally connected with about 10,000 people in one form or another. And one of the things that really stuck in with me is something that really surprised me when I was talking to a gentleman over on the east side about the Neighborhood Watch program. And he said nobody wants to call 911, or they don't want to call Crime Stoppers. They don't want to get involved. And I think the reason why it stuck with me so much is because it's like the proverbial movie thing. Nobody wants to get involved. They all close their doors and the shutters and everything else. And it took me aback, because they don't want to get involved, because if they call Crime Stoppers, which is totally anonymous, they're afraid, because they see their neighbor's house getting broken into. The police come, they arrest them, they go in the front door of the county building and right out the back door, and now they're afraid that this person is going to retaliate against them. And I think that's where you really need to...
What case is he talking about? I mean, you made the statement before.
I'll give you a case. Last month, in September of this year, there were 3 people that were arrested. They were all charged with Class X felonies. They spent 5 days in the county jail. A judge signed off on the probable cause sheet, and they were never charged. And they were let go, and the booking sheet shows that there were no charges to be filed per the state's attorney. And now that's one example of in the outdoor, or in the front door and out the back.
Are you familiar with that case?
I am not familiar, and I can tell you we work with law enforcement on a daily basis to make sure if we have offenses, we have enough evidence to prove that case, and there are a whole host of reasons, without knowing the particular case, why charges weren't filed. And so it's to guess wouldn't make any sense.
Well, you don't put somebody in county jail for 5 days guessing whether or not you
some people have been in jail for years and it turned out to be on false pretense. I mean, so how can you say that?
Well, I wouldn't say on false pretense.
Yeah.
I mean,
you don't know. I don't know. I don't know the details of the case.
And I know the details of the case he references. I know that we work on a daily basis with law enforcement to make sure each case is investigated, to make sure we have enough evidence. And oftentimes we are looking at other crimes this person might have committed. Sometimes they are used to get to somebody else. Maybe they have information on another crime, and we use those individuals. The police come to us and request that person be released so they can work with them to solve other crimes, and that's done. But There's a whole host of reasons, and without knowing that particular case, I can't tell you what.
All I can say is if I'm state's attorney and I have a confidential informant, they will no longer be the confidential informant if they're out there shooting up the town.
Is there somebody doing that?
Well, I can't say that the 3 shooters are confidential informants because I'm not privy to that, but I can say, yes, there are people out there doing it. There's the SJR reported it in September, the 3 shooters.
Can I ask kind of a big picture question? Criminal justice system is kind of bursting at the seams at both state and local level, I don't know about the federal. It has an impact on what you do, I would imagine. What is your vision for how the criminal justice system can be improved in order to meet the needs of society as well as not unnecessarily punish crimes that perhaps are better treated in another fashion?
Oh, and that's a great question. And I think one of the ways we can do it is while we prosecute violent crime and we aggressively prosecute that, we do so with common sense prosecution. One area of that would be the drug court that was established in December of 2010. I remember in May of 2009, I was with several other individuals. We were the drug court team we flew to Oklahoma City and put together the framework for the Sangamon County Drug Court. And I'm proud to say next Friday, we will graduate the first 3 graduates from that drug court. And what that drug court is, it's for nonviolent offenders who were in the system, who were in jail, who were in prison, who were committing nonviolent offenses because of their drug addiction. So it's a team approach using the judges, public defender's office, treatment providers, mental health providers, law enforcement, the state's attorney's office to deal with those crimes, to give those individuals the resources they need to combat their addiction so they don't commit crime. And that does several things. If you keep them out of the jail, there is more room in the jail for the violent offenders. And it saves money. And if you keep them out of DOC, that saves money upwards of $25,000 to $30,000 a year, the cost to house somebody in the Department of Corrections.
And are you also at the next step? There's been a move, like in Cook County, decriminalization, small amounts of marijuana or marijuana in general. Do you have any thoughts on what should happen with?
No, and that is a question for the legislature, and they make the laws, we enforce them. But I think other states have moved towards that. But I think the bigger issue is how are we going to help these individuals combat their habit and make sure they're drug free, because the problem is not necessarily the drug use per se, but it's the crimes they're committing because of their drug addiction. If they're forging checks or committing retail theft, they're breaking into stores or going into stores to then go trade that for drugs. I think another area in the area of specialized courts is a mental health court. I'm on the board of the mental health centers of Central Illinois, and I've been working with them to try to establish a mental health court because, unfortunately, many of the people that are arrested, committing crimes, and go to jail, maybe jail isn't the best place for them. Maybe the best place is a hospital, or maybe it's not in the jail, but outpatient treatment where they get the counseling and the medication they need.
It sounds good, but our mental health facilities are closing, and the system apparently isn't capable of serving the needs of people. I mean, are you observing that?
Oh, very much so, and I think half our meetings every other month is about funding issues with the mental health centers. So that's a big issue. And where are you going to get the funding? Where are we going to find places? And then we need to work together, and that's one area where partnerships, where the community working together to help these individuals. I think another area where we need is a veterans court. You know, more and more I see police reports coming through with individuals that are patriots who served our country, who we owe a debt of gratitude to, and they are committing offenses because, in large part, because of post-traumatic stress disorder or other things that happened to them when they were in the military.
So every veteran should be treated differently than regular people who do these things?
Not at all. I think that they have certain illnesses and certain issues that can be dealt with in a team or collaborative approach. The VA has resources. So I think it's identifying those individuals early on when they're taken into the jail to get those resources for them. So I don't think they're treated really differently. It's just getting the resources they need, whether it be a mental illness or the post-traumatic stress disorder or whatever, to the individuals that are in the jail.
Just to speak from a different aspect, because I too do think that expanding the drug court into a veterans court and a mental health court is a good idea. And I think since the the foundation is already there with the drug court. I think it can be expanded easily. But I want to speak to a different aspect of improving the criminal justice system from the eyes of the public. If I'm elected state's attorney, I want people to know that they can walk in and talk to an assistant state's attorney about the problems that are going on in their community. I think that, again, to have the state's attorney in court prosecuting is good, but I think that when people think about the state's attorney's office and they want to talk to the state's attorney, and I'm not saying that the state's attorney should be available to every person who walks in off the street, but the public should know that if they have a problem or an issue, that they can come in and talk to either the state's attorney or an assistant state's attorney. And I think that's critically important, particularly when we talk about victims' rights. If my house is broken into and the police do a report, and I want to know what's going on. I want my stuff back. I want to know what's going on. And I want to be able to call the police department. I want to be able to call the state's attorney's office.
What about the broader picture? The broader picture of criminal justice?
Well, I mean, I do think that there's financial burdens placed on all the counties for incarcerating people in the county jail. My view is, in sentencing, if they're a violent offender, and I mean truly violent, where there's a substantial risk of physical harm to somebody, those are the people that should take priority in our jail. I think that it's also a good deterrent to punish people through a fine. And there are fines that you can pay that are going to hurt people just as much as taking away their civil liberties by incarcerating them. And I think there has to be a balance. We can't subject the county to lawsuits for overcrowding. We can't subject the county to lawsuits because something happened in the jail. I think we need to focus the jail on the most violent criminal offenders and look at different sentencing alternatives.
Don't go to DOC anyway, right? The most violent go to state.
Well, I mean, they're going to be held until they're shipped off.
And what about the drug laws? Any particular change you would seek at this point, or are the drug laws the way they should be at this point?
I've not. I mean, you asked a question about small amounts of marijuana. I haven't really looked at that issue. I think it's a good one. I think I would just have to study it a little more to see, but I mean, I wouldn't want to incarcerate somebody in the county jail because they had an ounce of marijuana. I mean, I don't know if that's a lot or a little, but I mean, for small amounts, I wouldn't want to put them in the county jail for that.
Okay, we're down to one last question. Anybody?
Yeah, if I could have a second here.
Go ahead.
John, we don't see a lot of public corruption prosecutions. Some people in this town believe there's rampant public corruption. I was curious to see how many people come to you with tips. How much do you look into those? How much public corruption do you think is out there? I know you did try to bring the Mike Stout case to the grand jury and they declined to indict him. But if you could talk about that and then Ron respond to whatever John says about that.
All right, Chris. The U.S. Attorney's Office in the Central District has a public corruption unit, much like the Northern District does. Now, we hear about the Northern District more because of certain prosecutions over the last several years, but the U.S. Attorney's Office has a public corruption unit. We work with them on a whole host of cases, and I work with law enforcement on investigating all types of crimes in Sangamon County, including public corruption. And if there are cases that need to be investigated, we'll look into those and we'll prosecute them when necessary. But the resources in this area are with the U.S. Attorney's Office in prosecuting those types of cases. Even in the Northern District, when they're prosecuted, it's not Anita Alvarez and the Cook County State's Attorney's Office prosecuting them. It's the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Northern District doing that. That's not to say the State's Attorney's Office wouldn't or couldn't, and we will. And I point to the police officers and other officials that have been prosecuted, that have been indicted, to show that we'll move forward with all types of cases, and we'll investigate them when necessary.
Do you get much in the way of tips, though?
We do not. As far as tips as to criminal activity I guess we're talking criminal activity by elected officials in the State House.
Public officials?
Yeah, public officials. No, we get them and we investigate them, and oftentimes, those investigations aren't made public, and a lot of what we do with law enforcement isn't made public. If there are crimes being committed, if there's something that needs to be investigated, we will surely work with law enforcement to investigate those and make sure if prosecution is appropriate in state court, we'll do it. If it's appropriate in the U.S. Attorney's Office and federal court, then they'll do it.
Well, I think people know me for my public corruption stance, particularly from the 2008 campaign and then again in this campaign. There's a new law that's effective January 1, 2013, that's a legislative misconduct. And I've said that we need to look at that. We shouldn't have to wait for the U.S. Attorney to act. Now, if there's a collaborative relationship with the U.S. Attorney to prosecute that, I think that's great, but I don't think that the state's attorney should just ignore it. Now, Tony Libri, I guess, had a very interesting interview with you talking about corruption in his office, and it reminded me about 6 or 8 months ago, he was on San Madonia, and he was talking about the dispute that he has, or had, I don't know, with Irv Smith. And the dispute involved an employee in the circuit clerk's office that was stealing money. And that really piqued my interest. Why would Tony Libri and Irv Smith be having a dispute about an employee?
Was it the circuit clerk's office, or was it the Republican Party office in the past?
No, it was the circuit clerk's office. That's the way I understood it. Now, I know that those two have had disputes over various issues, but when he mentioned this one, I thought, why? And then, you know, the evidently, I mean, I don't want to take it out of context or misquote him, but something about taking money in exchange for clearing your driving record. I mean, that's the type of public corruption case that I think that we should be tuned into.
And one person we know of did plead guilty to something and charges related to that.
So, I mean,
We'll talk to Tony in this process, so we'll ask him. I think that's all we have today. Thank you both for coming in.
Yeah, I just want to mention one thing. I remember 4 years ago when the editorial board asked me about openness in government, and I'm a big proponent of openness in government. There's been an issue with the eavesdropping statute recently, and where you've had motorists who are recording police officers who are executing the stop, and those people were prosecuted, and now a federal court has said that violates the eavesdropping statute and so on. And I just think that everybody ought to have the right to stick up your phone and put it right there whenever you're dealing with a public official in their official capacity, because to me that keeps people honest. And I think we have a real hard time in Illinois keeping our public officials honest. And somebody sent me this, and I'm working on following it up, but it's an email exchange between, and I'll give it to you if you want it, but I was shocked to read this because it says that I would also like to point out that I was involved in trying to get this police officer fired for threatening to kill a female, shooting rounds near teenagers, and threatening to shoot a 14-year-old. And I just thought, now, if some news organization sent over a FOIA for this, where would you be? I mean, I think the public records ought to be disclosed. I think the FOIA Act, people need to be reminded that those are exceptions. That's not the rule. The public policy behind that is to have openness in government. And when public officials are relying upon these exceptions to exclude people from knowing what's going on, I think that's wrong.
You probably deserve a closing statement at this point, John.
Well, with regard to eavesdrop, briefly, I believe that it makes sense to have the best evidence of what happened in a certain situation, which would be the tape recording.
So you think people should be allowed to also turn on their phones?
So I think that makes sense. But I also, I respect the role of kind of the different branches of government. We have the legislature, which makes the rules. The courts interpret and say whether they're constitutional, and the state's attorney's office, law enforcement, enforce them. So, but I think the big issue in this campaign is who's the most qualified and experienced to be state's attorney. I have the experience in the courtroom in dealing with law enforcement and prosecuting cases. My opponent does not. Every night when I go home, I see my wife, my 2 daughters. I know why I do this job. To make this community a safer forum. I'm very fortunate to be state's attorney. I went to law school to be a prosecutor. I I built a career in that field, and I'm hoping to continue in that area. And I thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think we ought to make all communities safe.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.